Welcome to the last session of today. I want to turn it over to Maura Sogabe, the moderator for this session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lucian. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a very lively and informative session on cybersecurity for manufacturing. My name is Maura and I'm the moderator for this session. I head up security and compliance for Generate Capital. Generate is a dedicated sustainable infrastructure platform. Prior to joining Generate, I worked as a cyber security consultant at ONG North America. And before that, I worked at Pacific Gas and Electric in California, managing strategic initiatives to protect critical infrastructure. I'm very honored to talk about this very important topic with my fellow panelists. Collectively, we have over 100 years of experience in the ICS security space, protecting critical assets, so you're in excellent hands. Topics today that we will cover include how companies should think about securing OT assets, what businesses can do to improve their cyber capabilities, and what are some key lessons we can learn from recent cyber attacks. But before we start, here are a couple of housekeeping rules. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat tool. Tell us where you're located, what brings you here today. And if you'd like to network, share your LinkedIn profile. And if you could please post all of your questions in the Q&A tool. Now I will hand you over to my fellow panelists to do a brief introduction, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So over to you, Eric, to kick us off. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Eric Byres. I'm currently calling you from the backseat of a car in the middle of Georgia Strait off of the coast of Vancouver Island. There's a storm here and I'm stuck in a ferry. So if I sound a little like I'm in a tin can, I am. And I may be dropping out. But hopefully the miracle of cell communications will keep me connected here. A little my background, I've been involved in OT cybersecurity since the 1980s. I was one of the founding co-chairs for what was originally ISA 99 that eventually became IEC 62443 for the technical committees. And I was now I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Panelist Technology. Before that, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Belden, who you may know well. And before that, I was the founder and CEO at Defensible Security. And I've done a few things before that too, but we won't get into that. And Adolis is a company that specializes in providing companies in the OT space, whether they're software providers or OEMs or control systems vendors, or whether the users of those systems, visibility into their supply chain. How do you know that the software you're loading came from your OEM and not, say, a hostile nation state? So, and how do you know what's inside that software? So, that's me. Over to Gord.
So I think I'll go next. Thank you, Eric. So my name is Gary Gillespie. I am president of MDT, or Alvesi MDT Americas. We are a automation change management vendor providing version control and disaster recovery solutions for automation equipment in the manufacturing layer worldwide. Background, I started out as an engineer, began my career at NASA. I've been in the software space now for 25 plus years, working with software in critical asset infrastructure and just about every type of industry, from automotive to food and beverage, mining, life science, water, that uses automation assets, and looking at how you properly manage those environments for uptime, and making sure you track the changes and properly approve things that happen in your automation layer, and then when things don't go so well, helping you help recover from those issues. So that's my background. I guess we'll go to Richard.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, so this is Richard Koo. I'm with Trend Micro. I've been in the cybersecurity space for a little bit over 30 years, I would say. Spent the last 23 years or so in the IT side, and the last 7 years very focused on ICS or OT security solutions. I think many of you probably know Trend Micro pretty well. We've been around for more than 30 plus years, and we focus a lot on the IT side. Everything from your endpoint all the way to the cloud security solution, like you're protecting your workload and stuff like that. And that's one portion of our business. But there is a sister company we call TX1 Networks, and TX1 Networks is a new sister company that we formed a few years ago, and our focus there is really focused mainly on OT security solution. So if you look at the let's say frameworks, right? We have security solution, both hardware and software, and basically we can secure everything from level 0, level 1, 2, and 3, and 4, right? As well as basically the convergence of IT OT. We have security solution across those areas as well. So yeah, like I said, I spent 30 years in the industry, and have built every type of security solution from consumer user all the way to the security solution of protecting industrial control system, from manufacturers to power and oil and gas and so forth. So that's just a little bit about myself, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Richard and Derek and Gary. So like I mentioned earlier, the first kind of section of this panel will be focused on how companies should think about securing OT assets. And to kind of get us all warmed up, we'll start with a pretty general, hopefully easy question. And that's, how does IT cybersecurity differ from OT cybersecurity? And Eric, if you'd like to kick us off with that question, that would be great. Thank you.
Famous question, you are on mute.
Hello?
Richard? Hi, Richard. So we're trying to get Eric.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Excellent.
Hey, great. It's amazing how hard it is to find the button on a small iPhone. I'll also apologize to Gary for calling him Greg to start off with. So sorry about that. Gary. So I'm going to, I'd like to talk a little bit about that whole topic about OT versus IT, because I think it tends to be overstated. I mean, it's pretty obvious that in OT and IT, there are some major differences. Obviously we're dealing in OT with things that are, will kill you versus just like lose you lots of money. But one of the things I want to point out is I think this is overstated. And in fact, there was some really good research by one of the oil companies a few years ago where they did an analysis of all the IT security requirements that the OT groups hated. And what they actually found out is 97% of the OT security requirements were just fine. They weren't an issue. And 3% were awful and caused all sorts of trouble in OT. But because of that 3%, there's that perception that IT and OT are radically different and nothing works across the two. And I don't think that's the case. There are definitely big differences, which I'm sure most of you guys are out there, if you're on this call, know. But don't overstate it. Look for what are the real deal breakers and then address those.
That's interesting. Thanks very much. Would anyone else like to add onto what Eric has said there?
I think just to add to that, I mean, obviously there, as you said, there's a lot of commonality. So when you're looking at things that we'll talk about further on in the panel with various standards that are available, they're very applicable in both IT and OT space. So I think as you start looking at how those are applied, obviously as it relates to, in an IT environment, you've got Windows servers and Linux servers, things like that. In an automation layer, you've got hundreds of different types of technologies. So the hardware technologies are very, very different. But there's a ton of commonality in terms of the approaches and the security methods you need to use. So we'll talk about that as we continue.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. Is that probably the divergence is the biggest trick, that you have a lot more variation in operating systems and types of systems and requirements. So that's where the real challenges come in.
Yeah, just a couple of things, from, me, I think certainly there are, we talk about the different operating systems. I think on the OT side, you do see many legacy system, right? Especially like in the mini HMI machine and some of those environment where you're running Windows NT, Windows XP. I mean, there's not a lot of protocols that is also insecure, and updating patch, may not be readily available, right? Right away compared to the IT side. On the IT side, you really want to focus on the confidentiality and as a first priority, right? And so you're going to have, higher tolerance for interruption and latency. You require a lot of internet connectivity, for doing a lot of tasks. And you run multiple, multi-purpose type of operating, application, right? So I think these are some of the difference between the IT and OT side as well. And when it comes to looking at some of these different.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with you that I'm that there are some serious differences we got to be aware of.
Yeah.
We just don't want to overstate it and throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've seen it in practice as well. Like, when you look at utilities, for example, right, they're maybe not as concerned about the confidentiality or the integrity or even privacy. I mean, of course, it's important, but the most important thing is to keep the, whether it's, a manufacturing plant or the grid, to keep it up and running, right?
Yes.
So maybe it's the end goal that kind of is different as opposed to how you get there. So anyway, so with that, the next question, how has IoT Industry 4.0 and IT-OT convergence affected cybersecurity in the plant? And we kind of touched on that a little, but Richard, if you'd like to provide additional context, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think that, every time, or I would say every decade, right, when you have a huge change in the digital transformation. I look at back in the days when you got people moving from DOS to Windows, and the Windows, you have the internet, right? And then you have got cloud security, cloud and so forth. It's almost like that too, right? Now we are having this convergence between the IT, OT side. So to me, this is like a brand new, or it's like a additional platform changes, right? And people are now going through the transformation, and as you're going through the transformation, you're definitely going to open up your environment through multiple vectors, and the attack vector also that become very I would say widespread for many organizations because of that, right? So if you look at traditionally, most of the company, they're typically air gap, right? And for example, maybe in manufacturers or maybe in the utility space, most of these environments are typically air gap. But now with this transformation, you are very much connected to the internet, and now you really open that threat vectors for many organizations. So that's probably a big change in terms of in addition to the industrial 4.0.
Very good. We got a question from the audience that I think might be interesting to ask right now, and that's how is wireless technology affecting the manufacturing security concerns these days? Is it all hype or is it real?
Yeah, I'll tackle that. Yes, I mean, I think definitely we haven't seen a lot of attack yet in terms of coming to some kind of wireless connectivities, but I think it's not a matter of what will happen, right? It's a matter of when you're going to be attacked. And so wireless communication, if it's insecure, it is a vector that potential people can take advantage of, and so it will be impact. I mean, regardless, right? I mean, the adversary will do anything they can, right, and to try to compromise your environment. So it doesn't matter if you have a virus connectivities or an air gap, or people bringing, let's say, just a USB sticks, right? Eventually you're going to be compromised. So I would not count on say, well, wireless is not going to be attacked, because we've seen that in the past in the IT environment as well.
Very good. So building on that question, like what can be done to prevent unauthorized access to our automated production? And Gary, if you'd like to kind of take that question.
Sure. So that there are a lot of things that you can do to prevent, but there's no single item that you can do that's going to fix everything. Obviously there are firewalls, there are passwords. You've got a network segmentation that you can do. You can do various public-private networks, NAT switching, different kinds of things you can do to isolate your networks. You can do passwords in the controllers in many cases. When the newer technology, the newer controllers provide password capabilities. So there are lots of layers that you can put into the process, and then by managing those things effectively, so that only the people that have the appropriate passwords can get into the controllers, isolating the various segments of your network, so that while you may have a data reporting requirement for various MES SCADA operations, you don't want any more access to the actual control layer than you absolutely have to have. So there are several layers. So I think it's a variety of things. There's not a single answer that's going to keep you perfectly safe.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you 100% there. I think when people think of that there's going to be 100%, that's sort of like asking, how do I keep my boat floating? Since I'm sitting on a ferry, it's sort of, there's no one answer to that. Well, don't run it onto the rocks. Make sure you you plug the drain holes. Make sure you've maintained it. Make sure you've caulked the hull. Make sure you close the hatch. It's the same here. We're not dealing with a single solution that's going to keep our security boat floating. And so it's going to be a series of layers and a series of basically layers of protection that's going to keep us secure. It's not going to be one magical solution, one silver bullet.
And I would imagine everyone on this call has a different present state that you have to assess in terms of what you're dealing with and what your technologies enable you to do. Richard mentioned, the older technologies. We see that in a number of our customers where they're running machines that are using older technologies, everything back to XP on forward, and they have to use different security measures to protect and isolate those environments. If you have everything that's brand new and state of the art and can run all the passwords and all that, you're in a good situation, but you happen to be not in the norm. So I think most customers have machines that are very old. They have a long useful life. The ROI to replace the control system on that is not usually there unless you factor into it, the cybersecurity risk factors and what that can affect your ROI quite a bit.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that. I mean, Gary and mentioned some of this technology. If we step back a little bit, right, when it comes to cybersecurity strategy for OT environment, I always kind of look back and say, all right, what are some of the critical components, right? And so the way I look at it is the people, right? The process, the technology, the culture, right? I think those are on a very high level, the fundamental thing that I think we all need to, practice. For example, people, right? You need to make sure that within the organization, you have trained your people, right? Your employees, make sure that they are security aware, right? And you make sure that you have security professionals and they're qualified with the right skill to be able to attack issues or incidents as it come, right? And you have the competent people and resources to deal with it, right? So that's, I think, the people side. That is kind of the basic stuff that I think we all need to do. And then from a process perspective, right? I think there's the governance, the policy frameworks, right? Management system, best practice, and something like that. I think we all have to do, from a process perspective. And then, we talk a little bit about the technologies, which Gary mentioned, some of this technology. But one thing that I want to stress a lot from a technology perspective is that you need to be to, I would say, validate some of this technology and make sure that it can be deployed and work, in the OT environment. I have seen many companies where they're looking at IT product and try to, deploy on the OT side. and sometimes it doesn't necessarily always work, right? I mean, I have example where people actually try to do a vulnerability scanning using an IT product, right, and try to scan on the OT side, and guess what, right? It doesn't really solve the problem. However, it actually create more problem because it take down the whole network, right? And so those are technology that we need to kind of validate and make sure it really worked in there. And last but not least, I look at within any organization, right? You have this. You kind of have to create a cybersecurity culture within the organization, right? It is crucial, and it's important to kind of reduce that risk. If you look at companies who have well-educated people who understand the risk, they're less vulnerable and less being attacked by the adversary. So those are some of the things that I think every organization needs to do to build that culture, within the organization. And you got to start from the top, right? From the management level all the way down to the different level within the organization. These are some of the, I think, basic fundamental things that I think we need to do, right? And then from there, we can think about, what are my strategy in terms of technology and so forth. So those are something that, I would also, suggest adding.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard. So this is good. We're kind of segueing into the second section of this discussion, focusing right on what businesses and companies can do, right, to improve their cyber capabilities. And one of those things we haven't really touched upon yet, but I think it's key, and that's the architecture. And Eric, I know you have thoughts on with respect to like architecture, and would you like to share kind of some of the lessons that you've learned or the things that you've seen in the wild, so to speak, with respect to companies and their cyber capabilities and their security architecture?
Yeah, sure. So I think the number one thing that people need to be doing is building a defendable architecture. That's going to be a layered architecture and also an architecture that you can disconnect when things are going bad. You think about Colonial Pipeline, which I think we'll be talking about later too. And while everybody got really upset at Colonial Pipeline for shutting down the pipeline, the attack wasn't on the OT system. It was on their financial and billing systems, but that was so integrated together that they could not run their pipeline without that connection into the IT system. So, this is the first thing that I ask people is, okay, if you're under attack, how can you disconnect the OT system and keep it running? Is this a defensible architecture? And if it isn't a defensible architecture, if it isn't some way that you can back down and sort of curl up and get your OT system more secure when you're under attack, like Colonial was, then you're just asking for trouble. And the second thing I think that's really, really important, and it goes back to some of the earlier topics that we were talking about, is the Industry 4.0, is do you understand what connections you actually have? People often talk about the air gap. I honestly don't believe there ever was an air gap. There was some really good testimony. I can't remember who it was from. It was one of the senior people at DHS about 10 years ago to Congress, and they said, on average, when they go in and look at air gas systems, they find an average of 10 connections. And that was always my experience. It wasn't an air gap. It was just misleading. It was an illusion. What's Industry 4.0 has brought into focus is now we're not even close to an air gap. The air gap is completely gone. That's actually an improvement. But if you don't know where your connections are, if you don't understand the fact that vendor XYZ has managed to carve a hole through your firewalls and are connecting to your controllers, then as soon as you're under attack, or as soon as they're under attack, you're going to be vulnerable. So this is really what I think we need to start is, what are your connections? Is it defensible? And how do you disconnect those connections and keep the platform running?
Excellent, very good. So moving on from the architectures, NIST CSF states there are 5 pillars for a good security strategy: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then I I gather that studies show that like 80% of the requirements and money goes to the protect pillar. Do we need more balance in that space? Gary, Eric, Richard, who would like to, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think it was touched on, I think maybe Richard touched on it earlier, but it's very important to have defensible layers in your protection strategy. But another thing that's really important to do is operate from a model that at some point something will get through. So let's assume and start from a standpoint of at some point we are going to have something that's compromised. Now maybe it's not the entire infrastructure that's that's going to be crypto locked, but let's start with the assumption that something could get through. So are you not only doing the protection and the identification portions of the NIST framework, but are you also doing the detection and the recovery, making sure you have proper backups of everything, not just your server environments, but your automation layer. If you did have devices that are compromised, can you wipe those and recover and just reload the last known good version of all the configuration that runs all those hundreds or thousands of devices across your automation layer? These ransomware attacks tend to be pretty hard on the hardware side of things, not only servers but device side, and so it's really important that you have good backups, and so that the NIST framework's really good for identifying not only just the planning and protection layers, but also making sure you have proper ability to identify those threats, identify when somebody has compromised something in your network, and to be able to recover from it in a quick fashion.
Yeah,
I would. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Richard again. Yeah, I agree with Gary, right? I think that organization to look at cybersecurity as a holistic solution, right? And you want to be able to make sure that you have all the key pillars, from basically detection to prevention and recovery and even remediation. All those things need to be in place. I think in addition to the NIST framework, right? If you look at what are some of the industry standard framework out there, right? You got the NIST framework. I think it's a really good one for it's a best practice for many organizations. Right, you have the IEC 62443, right? I think frameworks is also good for industrial, environment like manufacturing, right? And so those are good framework to have, especially, if you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? Because many of these frameworks have been around for decades, and have been really well used by many organizations. So, I would suggest that many companies also look at that as well. But yes, a holistic, solution from, basically prevention to detection, and identify, all the stuff, and need to make sure that holistic solution are put in place.
Excellent, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would absolutely reiterate what you sort of led with here, is that there's probably been too much focus on the protect. Again, since I've been just sitting on a ferry for a while, I'm thinking in boat analogies, but if this ferry that I was on said, yeah, we aren't going to give you life jackets, we're not going to have an alarm system because we'll never sink. We've got perfect protection to our hull. We never run aground. Well, the last boat that said that was called the Titanic. And I think the same thing that is true in security. If anybody says, hey, we'll never be penetrated, we'll never be infected, we'll never be ransomed, they're kidding themselves. And so I think we need to move the industry more to the other pillars, particularly the ones around detect, so that when your boat's sinking, to respond. What are you going to do about it? And also, very, very important, how do you recover? What do you do to get that back? And this is, I think, a little bit of a limitation right now in the industry. Is we got a little carried away, and I'm probably in the protect department, but I think it's really focus on that detect, respond, and recover side of the identify as well. So yeah, without that, I think we're going to be on our own little personal Titanics or our own little corporate Titanics if we're not careful.
Yeah, maybe I'll add a little bit to on top of what Gary also mentioned, right? I think part of the challenge for many organizations is that, many of the environment, we operating today, right, is so old, right? We talk about old operating system in some of these HMI machine or, environment. And, it is difficult to get the latest and greatest technologies, right? And so I think part of that's what the reason why today you have certain, I would say security solution out there really more designed for the IT side. And now organizations start to, provide solution for the OT side. And that may take time to really, validate and make sure they have the right solution, right? Because I think that's really the challenge. You have a lot of products really more looking at providing visibilities, but then when it comes to prevention and detection, you really need to design the right product. Otherwise, it can have some issue on the environment. I think that's why you start to see people spend more time on the kind of the prevention side and less on the detection or recovery. So hopefully, as we move forward, a new technology come in play, and more organizations start to build, true purpose-built solution for the OT environment. We're gonna have some of this challenge at least for a little while.
And that's interesting because someone just asked the question around converging the detection and monitoring, dashboards for both IT and OT. Because I guess, if you have to support like suites of tools that duplicate, there's a lot of benefits you can get from one system, one dashboard, visibility into both areas, overlapping, right? Are we there yet with this kind of comprehensive dashboard for IT, OT?
Yeah, I mean, I started to see there are some, same tool available out there that started to consolidate both the IT and OT side. It will take a little bit of time, I think, on the OT side to really extract all the data and all the information so it can flow up to the single dashboard. But yeah, I think at least from my experience, I start to see some of those. I think one of the big challenge will be that because you have this convergence between IT OT side, and the folks on the IT and the OT side really need to have that conversation and and speak to each other, and how do they flow those information and those data into a single dashboard so that information can be shared across both organizations. Until that really happen, we could have a little bit challenge, but I think I start to see that convergence happening. It's a good thing, right? I don't know if Eric or Gary see similar, but that's kind of my experience so far. It's going to the right direction. We're seeing that.
Yeah, I think that the direction is certainly, things are moving in that direction, but it is a more complicated landscape, I think, on the OT side, just because of the age, as we've been talking about, of some of these technologies, and also the methods of connectivity. I mean, you can monitor server health, you can monitor various things that are looking at endpoint protection and variety of things. There's a lot of tools on the IT side that can be leveraged, but also some of these technologies are, there are different methods that you've got to connect to them to gather the data. A lot of devices you can go up and plug into and make changes. So you have to be able to interrogate these devices, look for changes that have been made outside of your change control process, because it's a more complex landscape in terms of the data gathering that you need in order to feed up to the dashboard. But absolutely, the dashboarding is where everyone wants to go, but the tools involved to get all that data, are a little more complex on the OT side.
So from a manufacturing perspective, who's responsible for requiring third parties to ensure, whether it's their software or their products or their devices or their sensors are adequately protected? I know in California, for example, they passed a law, I think it was 2 years ago, around better protections for IoT devices, right? Don't have a default password that's on the device, protections like this. So how can manufacturers make sure that that the devices and the products they're provided have the right level of security controls. Is that something that they can do themselves just through negotiations, or does there need to be some policies or, you know, a framework put in place? How are your companies handling that?
Do you want me? I'll tackle that, and then maybe Gary and can also Eric as well. But I think, you know, from a business perspective, right, I think there's still quite a bit of challenge, you know, facing them, right? And I think, you know, you have, you know, kind of the IT OT folks, right, and they're not really talking, right? And then of course you have the folks on the OT side does not have sufficient, you know, cybersecurity knowledge or expertise, right, and how to address some of this issue. So I think that's something that I think organizations have to tackle first, right, before they even talk about, you know, some of those things. And then you have, we talk about this convergence, the roles and responsibilities, you know, between the IT OT side is not completely clear, right? You know, we start to see a lot of CISO or, you know, organization where they have the CISO now kind of responsible for both the IT security and the OT security solution. And I think if that start to happen more, I think this question can be answered, right? And then, you know, we talk about all those, you know, I would say legacy liability issue like old operating system, insecure protocol, right? Device that was never built with security in mind. There's a lot of those things I think have to fundamentally to be, you know, addressed. And I think maybe, you know, last but not least, kind of like the fundamentally, I think organization need to look at security on the OT side as a higher priority, right? I think traditionally people don't look at, you know, security as a, you know, I would say profit, you know, entity, right? And so it's hard for, you know, to justify to make some of this change. But I think this is some of the fundamental thing that I think organizations need to address first. And then I think when that is addressed, then you can really talk about, okay, how do we address some of the real security inside some of this old operating system or some of this application that have been around for ages, and that will require more investment and more, you know, communication between all the organizations.
Very good. Eric, would you like to add anything to this question?
Can you just repeat the question again? Because I just dropped out there for a second. So.
Okay, I don't think I'll be able to repeat it exactly word for word because
No,
I kind of riffed it on it. But essentially, it's basically around the topic of how can manufacturers reduce third-party risk posed by their software or maybe even hardware supply chain.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, I'm happy to talk about supply chain. I want to sort of actually put this in context too, because, you know, what we're seeing is the supply chain attacks are the attacks that particularly foreign nation states prefer to use right now. I mean, we've seen these attacks, for example, on you know, SolarWinds is a great example. Don't go after the U.S. government agencies that you want to penetrate, Mr. Putin, but go after a supplier. And we're all facing that. We're seeing supply chain attacks go up 100, 200, 300% every year. And it's the tool of choice now by sophisticated attackers. So how do people deal with that? Well, this is where something like the executive order that we saw in the US and also in similar regulations happening in other jurisdictions, where they're saying, hey, you've got to tell your customers what's in that software. It's not just a blob of software. It's software that contains all these third-party components. So techniques like software bill of materials, where a list of the software components is supplied, and tools. Our company focuses on providing tools to generate those sort of solutions, generate SBOMs, and then analyze them. Okay, you've got the software bill of materials. Were you just sold a package that contains log4j and is super vulnerable? Yes or no? So I think for the software supply chain issues, the two points that really matter is, A, this is something we've not had to deal with in the past, but the bad guys are making us deal with it. We've got to understand what are the ingredients in the soup of software we get every day in our control systems. And second, we absolutely have to start using these standards like software bill of materials and to be able to understand what are the risks that we're buying. What is it that we have to deal with? Where are the vulnerable components? What are the vulnerable components that are being exploited? If we don't do that, we're going to lose this battle with particularly foreign nation states trying to penetrate our control systems.
Very good. Gary or Richard, would you like to add anything additional? Okay. But yeah, so the next kind of group of questions are around lessons learned from recent cyber attacks, and you're going to hit on it earlier, Eric. I guess it was just 1 year anniversary of the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? And this incident kind of reinforced the need for close collaboration between government and private sector. What do you think about the role of government and specific to kind of manufacturing and government relationships and collaboration? What do you see going on there? Is there intelligence sharing, etc.?
Was that for me? Sorry. Were you asking?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
yes.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that one. So first of all, I think that there has actually been quite an improvement in the US environment, but also in Europe and in the Middle East. Intelligence sharing is improved. For example, good example in the US, it's not really intelligence sharing, but providing information that is absolutely useful to companies. For example, the list of exploited vulnerabilities, actively exploited vulnerabilities. We get too wound up about vulnerabilities, but what's really mattered is what vulnerabilities are the bad guys using. So you look at CISA's list of actively exploited vulnerabilities, there's really useful intelligence being shared there. But I think the biggest thing that we're seeing the various government agencies starting to do, and not all of them do it well, is starting to say, this is what we want to achieve, not how to do it. But, and the executive order is a good example of this. It was really a list of these are the goals that we want to achieve. And then that's setting a baseline, not just in the government, but across all the industries. And we see executive order being a good example, starting to show that, hey, supply chain is something that's important. US government says they won't buy you software if you don't deal with the supply chain problem. But then I'm seeing this happen in large manufacturing companies. I won't mention who it is, but there's a very, very large manufacturing company who's looked at this specifications and this requirements from the US government and say, hey, if it's good enough for the US government, it's good enough for us too. And so it's really setting a minimum bar, which I think is exciting. If I can rant on a little, another thing, with Colonial Pipeline, what was fascinating is that, again, this was an attack on an IT system. They ransomwared the IT system. They did not ransomware. They did not get into the control system, yet the control system shut down. So it's absolutely critical that we get a better understanding of how our IT and OT systems interact. If we don't do that, then IT systems will be the Achilles heel of OT systems.
Yeah, I
That's
kind
interesting.
I can agree with Gary on that too, right? Because this Colonial Pipeline kind of speak to where we say that you have the IT side and the OT side, they don't really talk to each other, right? And that conversation doesn't really happen. And I think hopefully over time that they're gonna come together and be able to work together and be able to address some of this. For this particular attack on the Colonial Pipeline, if they would have that conversation, maybe they didn't necessarily have to shut down all this pipeline, but because they were so concerned, so worried about it, and that level of communication may not necessarily happening. And I think that's why they take the whole pipeline down for maybe not even for a good reason, right? And so having that conversation, I think it's good to have. I do agree with Gary on many of those points that he mentioned or Eric mentioned about, right, in terms of some of these issues.
Very good. I guess that gets back to this whole concept of defensible architecture and actually knowing what your architecture is, kind of back to your comment from earlier, Eric, around, organizations thinking that there was no convergence between IT and OT, and then all of a sudden they see all these connections, right? So,
Yeah.
you know,
And I
having
just
some
remembered
really
who it
good
was. Yeah.
into your environment.
Yeah, I just remembered who it was. It was Sean McGurk when he was the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, testifying to Congress, saying, on average, companies that think they're air-gapped actually have 10 connections into their OT system. So, you know, if you don't understand your system, the bad guys will understand it better, and they will figure it out for you.
Yeah, having the government involvement with the private sector, I think this is, like Eric said, I think it's a plus. I mean, it's a good baseline, good guidance for everybody to begin or to start. Otherwise, everybody's gonna, have their own way of doing it and may not be synchronized well. So, some of the executive order that came in, I think last year, the year before, I think those are good guideline and baseline to, for every organization.
Yeah.
As we're talking about the various frameworks, and there's a lot more collaboration between the government and certainly in certain critical infrastructure sectors, but across broader manufacturing, perhaps less so, maybe because of competitive factors or whatever may be the reasons for manufacturers not to collaborate as much. But there are a lot of standards organizations that are publishing these various things. So I think it's a matter of assessing where you are. Looking at, NIST is a good place to start in terms of a framework and some pillars, and operate from a standpoint that, what is the low-hanging fruit? What can we do to, from a standpoint of, if we do have a attack, we do have something that happens, are we recoverable? What does that look like? And then start just basically adding those layers and start adding the defensive strategy, but not putting all of your eggs in just that one basket.
Interesting. So another risk that was kind of mentioned in an earlier session and also was asked via the chat here is around insider threat, right? Protecting your IP in the manufacturing space. What are you seeing people do specific to insider threat, and how do you think about it, and how can people manage that risk? That's open to anyone. Gary, would you like to take it?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really tough one. I mean, there are, with any type of IP protection and confidentiality, there's sort of kind of basic rules of need to know type of thing, which are useful in providing segmentation of your sensitive data, so that it's only accessible to those that really need that section of the information. Monitoring the assets that are running these critical recipes, formulas, different types of things, making sure those are properly monitored and you're keeping track of who makes the changes, and that you're validating that those processes and formulas have not been modified without going through your change approval process. And that's all part of having a proper change control process in place, and proper tools to make sure you're capturing and auditing those changes. But IP protection is a really complex topic. And so again, there's no single solution to it, but it's critically important to segment the information so that you don't post your critical information on a shared drive somewhere, and you really need it under proper control.
Eric or Richard, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm going to say about insider threat. Insider threat has actually changed over the last couple of years because we've gone so remote. Thanks to the pandemic, and so now there's less difference between insider threat and an attacker managing to just get access to an insider. So you look at attacks for an insider's account, and so you look at attacks such as the attacks in Ukraine in 2015, 2016 on the power systems. The way the attackers did it was by stealing account access and then acting like insiders inside the Ukrainian power system, and so it's honestly, I think the real trick here is is not saying, well, there's insiders and there's outsiders, but there's access management. How do we make sure that the person who says it's Eric Byres logging in is Eric Byres? And then how do we make sure whether Eric Byres is inside or outside, we have an understanding of controls on what he can do, and and a way of logging and managing and detecting that, wait a second, Eric Byres just logged in from Red Square into our system and is making a bunch of set point changes. So, I think insider versus external is no longer such a nice clean division anymore. It's much more blurred thanks to the amount of remote work we're dealing with.
Interesting, great point. So we talked about vulnerability management, insider threat, and third-party risk. What other trends do you see in attacker methods and motivations over the past few years?
Well, I'll say I'm happy to comment on that. I think there's two trends, unfortunately, and they're both well in the news. And one is the large-scale commercialization of ransomware. So it's no longer you're ransoming, my personal computer for $300 worth of Bitcoin, but you're ransoming, hospitals, you're ransoming pipelines, and you're looking for millions of dollars. So much more professionalized, much more widespread ransomware operations that are using ransomware as a service, basically. So they're using somebody like DarkSide. And then the second thing is the whole question of why attack a hardened facility when you can go after their suppliers. So the supply chain attacks. I think those two are absolutely the trends that we're going to see. More professionalization of ransomware, more large-scale ransomware, and more focus on using the supply chain rather than direct attacks.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add on top of what Eric mentioned is, as people start to utilize more artificial intelligence, right? I think, and quantum computer moving forward, I think that those are areas that we have to also consider to look at, right? Because I'm sure that, as we're using, AI and, building application and system more intelligent, right? You're definitely going to see the adversary also going to look into some of this technology and how can they better evade, right? Some of the capability we have today, right? So yeah, ransomware, all the malwares, I think it's going to continue to. It's really, I think it's the platform, the type of operating system, the application that people are going to be utilized like to, attack some of this environment, right? And we haven't seen any, I would say, industrial control specific type attacks, right? But I think that's where we may want to keep an eye on it, right? A lot of attacks we see on ransomware or phishing attacks, and those things are more kind of the traditional, but what's out there in the horizon specific to like the industrial control system, right? And they're really targeting, let's say, utilities or power.
Whoa. Right? Hey, I'm going to disagree with you there, Richard. I mean, I'm looking at this current series of attacks that we're seeing called Pipe Dream. Pipe Dream is absolutely intended to go after the natural gas facilities. It is intended to be destructive. I mean, that is an OT attack, top to bottom. Right. I think that unfortunately, there's now people, there's now organizations, largely government intelligence agencies from foreign nation states who are happily training themselves up to specifically go after industrial controllers. Pipe Dream, and this is actually an interesting thing. You read the CISA documents about it, and they say the issues. If you have Schneider or Omron, you should be concerned. But actually, that's misleading because that's where they found it. The attacks go after something called the Codesys runtime framework, which is used in hundreds of different controllers from dozens and dozens of different vendors, and people don't know they've got that software, and that's why so you don't know that the Russians could easily pivot over and go after a different controller. It would be absolutely trivial because I built this attack software to be general purpose against not a particular brand of PLC, but a particular platform that lives in dozens of PLCs. So I think this is the, with the changing world, is they're going after the OT system now, guys. They're not happy with just going after IT.
Right. No, I agree. Right. I think what I'm trying to say is that, we have a lot of attacks, in the past, really kind of focused, like for example, ransomware. A lot of IT focus, very few on the, OT side. But to your point, right? I think we're going to see more and more, right, attack specific and design, those, type of attack are designed to address the OT environment and to attack that kind of environment. So we're definitely going to see in there, but I think they're also going to become more and more sophisticated, right? Because on the OT side, right, it's more complex, different type of operating system, and old and new, they're all mixed together, right? So I think that's where we're going to see more and more of those for sure. I do agree with you on that, right?
Yeah, I think we agree on that. Yeah.
So we have about 6 minutes left, and we have an interesting question here that I think is worthwhile to ask. And it's around, we've talked about strategies and frameworks and architectures and what are the key threats out there. But like Robert has a question here from the audience. Are there any specific tools, resources you would recommend to address each area of concern? So I guess at a practical level, where can our listeners go to learn more around the actions that they can take to kind of address some of these risks and to better protect their manufacturing assets?
I'll attack that, and then maybe Gary or Eric can add. I think there are many tools, right, and framework out there, right? We kind of touch on a few of them already. We talk about the NIST frameworks, right? And those are good industry standard that people can go and look at as a reference. We talk about the ISA 99, right? Frameworks and part of IEC 62443 standard. Those are good standard. I think people can look at, right, as well. So I think those, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel because these standards have been around for years, and a lot of people already use this as a baseline. So I think those are good starting point in terms of what are the tools out there. There are many companies out there in the market today are developing security solutions, right, for both manufacturer or OT environment. Everything from protecting their device when they're building from the ground up, or you can have, let's say, individual, solution that can set as a micro segmentation between your different layer within the organization from level 0, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. You could do that. There are solutions out there in the market. You have security solutions that you can protect, right? Some of the HMI machine, right, that have been around for many years with older operating system. There's a lot of application like whitelisting out there you can use there to protect some of this environment. And between IT OT side, there's a lot of products. So I would suggest that I go to some of these, organizations, look at their website and focus some of the solution. But these are some of the basic things that I think people can fundamentally start with.
I think
go for it, Gary.
Yeah, thanks. I think as we've talked several times about the NIST framework, and if you're not familiar with it, if you just search for NIST 5 pillars, it should come up. It's a good starting point. It's a basic PowerPoint that'll go through the introductions of it from, but starting with that framework and then looking at the tools and technologies that are out there, do an assessment of where you are as a business in terms of where you're at, what types of things you need to protect against. There are competing interests from the desire to have corporate networking and do all the reporting and all of the MES tools and all up to the business layer reporting that corporations want to have, that competes with really keeping everything locked down and isolated, which is what cybersecurity is attempting to do. So there are competing interests, but there's a lot of complementary. There are a lot of tools and technologies that exist out there. Starting with just very basic have everything backed up, have everything under proper version control, and isolate those backups so that if they compromise your systems, they don't compromise your backups at the same time. There's just basic tools and tips, and then start adding additional layers to that in terms of more sophisticated endpoint technologies and a variety of things. There's just so many different things that, everything from looking at, and then you can move in, obviously looking at your supply chain. It just goes on and on, but there are lots of good frameworks out there. You shouldn't feel alone. And basically you have to assess where you are as a business, get executive buy-in about the importance of these things, and go in and ask the question of, what happens if we get a ransomware attack? What are we going to do? Because that sometimes can spur the conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Gary. I think there are a lot of frameworks. I'm going to specifically also call out, like, the NIST framework is a framework. It's a good guideline to make sure that you're thinking about all the things you have to deal with when you want to create a security program. I'd also specifically call out IEC 62443, which is a little different than a framework. It's a standard for our industrial control systems in manufacturing. So that's the one where you're looking for your policies. How are you going to achieve a goal that's required or suggested in the NIST framework? You can go and look up the process, what needs to happen in order to make that goal reality. And that's where you're going to go to 62443. The other thing, I think that this market's matured a lot, and there's companies like Gary's, which is a good example. Obviously, MDT is got a lot of experience in dealing with this kind of issue for hundreds of clients. So don't try and do this from scratch. There's other companies out there that offer sort of a different line of services. Good example would be Dragos or Nozomi, which have very, very good visibility and response tools. And of course, I'll put a blatant plug in for my company, Dolus, if you're getting started into supply chain management for software.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Richard, did you have anything would you like to add, or?
I think I already respond to that already.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. So I hope this was of value to the participants, and reach out via LinkedIn. I would like to thank our sponsors, Adolas, Avisis, Trend Micro, and thank you very much for your time. Great discussion. It'll be very interesting. Come back in a year, see where we're at, what's happened. It's definitely, things are moving very fast, and it's exciting times. So thank you very much for your time, and have a lovely evening. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Maura, Richard, and Eric for great insights here on cybersecurity. You couldn't have a manufacturing day without having a good foundation on the cyber side. So I know throughout the day, we announced that we're going to have some winners of Rebecca Morgan's book, about 5 of you. We're going to switch to a wheel of names to draw the winners. We also want to invite all the folks that had been posting actively, stuck around until 5 p.m. Sometimes it's midnight somewhere else in the world. Like I've heard some of the folks from Jakarta sticking around this past midnight. And we'd like to invite those active users to continue to be part of this community. As you may have heard, we're roughly about 284,000 folks around the world, decision makers across manufacturing, energy, and infrastructure. We'd like to invite the active folks that have posted to the Q&A to join the community where the speakers will be to continue the conversation. I'm going to quickly share the hashtag for today. We're going to respond to some of the questions they didn't get to today, leveraging that hashtag. We're also going to respond to some of the confidential questions directly via the email for those of you that have left the email or responded in a manner that we can track you, meaning you didn't check the box, it's anonymous. With that, I'd like to basically go and then over the next session and draw the winners of the book of Rebecca Morgan. And like I said, you get an email within the next 48 hours from our team to join our VIP community. So in order to do that, what I need to do is share the website. Let me go back to that. So we have what is called the wheel of names. We've entered pretty much every name that had throughout the day had contributed to questions. So there's about 200 folks in there. Thank you for being, oh, I'm sorry, 153. I'm gonna go with the first name. Let me see if I can find that button because I didn't cover. Oops. Sorry about that. Let me make sure I got everybody in there. And I apologize for that. I think I'm gonna switch back to, this is the problem going to the live thing. I apologize. It's somehow still trying to solve the problem. Here we go. So I'm gonna hit enter. And we're gonna draw the first winner of the Rebecca Morgan book on manufacturing. As you may know, she opened up she was the first moderator for today, this morning at 8 a.m. And let's see if make sure that we're getting that. Here we go. Not sure. Start or shuffle. Here we go. Yes, my team is screaming behind me. What happens here? Oh, here we go. All right, so the first winner of the book goes to, all right, Zibusiso Siziba. So we will track you down to send us your email even if you're not present. So that's the first one. The next one will be shortly announced. Here we go. Majunita Bhat will be contacted via email. There we go. Dylan Arnold, thanks. You've been active participant in the morning session. Well, no, I'm sorry, in the 5 minutes calculator around predictive maintenance. Thanks for that. And here we go. Anand Kumar Mishra. And here's the last one for today before we conclude the program for today. That's the last winner of Rebecca Morgan's book. And here we go. That's going out to Norm Stewart. Thanks again for the active participation. What I like to do is now is essentially remind you of a couple of events that we have coming up. So May 26th, we have something on Smart City. Check out our website. We are also going to do the Energy Day on June 8th. And then between now and June 8th, we have several events. Feel free to reach out, Distributech in Dallas. We're going to be at Hanover Messe in Germany. We're doing live broadcasts from there. So if you're there, feel free to join us. We'll do podcasts. And then we're going to be at the ARC Forum in Orlando, June 6th through the 9th. Thanks again for the active participation. Thank you to the speakers, Gary, Eric, Maura, Richard, and the sponsors for today: Hitachi, Siemens, Fortinet, Keyfactor, Cake Factory, EMQ, MDT, Trend Micro, Faircom, Nozomi, Limble, CMMS, HiveMQ, Adolus, and Raven AI. We couldn't do it without you. We started on a mission 5 years ago to democratize the industrial market insights. And we said, we want to offer the same seat at the table for small to mid-sized companies as well as large giants. And today we've accomplished that. I think there's over 40% sponsors supporting us than what we expected. We offer folks, they were two-man shop at some point and they're to Series A. Today, we also offer the same seat at the table for a large giant. There were close to 400,000 people. Their CEO was speaking, as well as a startup that was a winner, one of the hackathon. And those are kind of the things, the activities that we are continuing to promote and make sure that there is opportunities for startups and innovative sort of ideas to change the landscape in manufacturing. Once again, thank you for supporting us and look forward to see you at a future event.